Are there certain things in this hobby that you find really scary? Me too. Sometimes, taking on new materials, new techniques, it can be really fear-inducing, really worrying. You'll think to yourself, what if I spend all this money investing in these new tools or these new paints, and I suck at it? Like, that's going to be a huge waste of money and time. What if I ruin my minis and I can't fix them? Well, the truth is, this is something that I've been struggling with quite a bit lately, thanks to a really cool video from the legendary Vince Venturella, which I will link below. I managed to get over a major hump of fear recently. I'm talking, of course, about oil paints. Now, I already use oil paints, which you will have seen in some of my tutorials, for doing things like pin washing, rust effects, very simple stuff. I already knew that they had this amazing advantage of being pretty much perfectly erasable. You can essentially just rub them out if you're not happy with them, which is something you can't do with acrylic paints. But I just constantly had this fear of trying something more substantial with them, actually, trying to work up like some armor volumes or some blends with them or something. And those are things that it's known that they're really good at, just for some reason I didn't want to do it. Now, after seeing Vince's video on hobby cheating, he painted some black armor using some oil paints, I finally snapped. I finally reached that point where I was just like, do you know what? I'm gonna give this a try. I need to stop holding myself back. So I picked up some of the oil paints that Vince recommended in that video. Again, I will link it in the description so that you can see that as well. And I decided to set about this mixed media project, painting the Ambot. Now, I wanted to use both acrylics and oils because I wanted to kind of be able to really feel the difference. But it was important to me to finally just get past this worry about not painting with these things. So let's take a look at how it went. Okay, so nothing scary about the pre-prep stages. First of all, I started with a miniature sprayed silver. I think I used Vallejo dark aluminium, and then generously smashed all over with some basilicanum grey contrast paint. Typical way that I would start, any miniature that had a robotic skeleton. From there, I then got my scale 75 art black and started to just block in all of the armor panels. This is everything that isn't the metal skeleton, essentially, or, isn't a blade or isn't specifically made of silver metal. Okay, so we're pretty quick in here and we're going to get onto the scary part now. Here's the oil paints. Abteilung 502. Colours that I picked for this job were intense blue, black, and faded white. Now, applying these oils is actually really, really straightforward. You just pop them down onto a palette or tile or whatever you're going to use, and you thin them just with white spirit in exactly the same way you'd thin acrylic paints with water. White spirit is super cheap. You can get like a litre of it for a few pounds or a few dollars. It's not an expensive product. Now, once I got my head around this idea that white spirit is just water, this became a lot simpler. So here's me applying the blue, then the black, and then the white, each in sequence. And you can see that all I'm doing here is just kind of spotting them on in an order from darkest to lightest. So the black is where my shadows are going to live, the blue is where my midtones are going to live, and the white is where my highlights are going to live. From there, I just need to take a soft brush. Vince did recommend in his video a soft brush, so I found the softest one I had going spare. And you will want to use brushes here that you're only going to use for oils, because once you've got white spirit and, residual oil paint in a brush, it's going to repel water anyway, so it's no longer going to be useful for acrylic painting. So you will want to separate some brushes, just to use for this job. But anyway, point being, soft brush. And all you have to do is just jab at it. It's just kind of make these little stabbing, swirling, soft, gentle motions. It actually really reminded me of when you see Bob Ross painting clouds in his videos. Just those kind of soft, swooshing, gentle touches, barely kissing the paint. And it just magically blends together right on the miniature. It's literally perfect blends. These are blends that would take hours to achieve with acrylics. And they just happen right in front of you for nothing. Like, this is the easiest painting I've ever done, and I was sat here for months being scared to try it. So once those oils are dry and they've had a coating of satin varnish over them, this is what they look like. You can see we've got nice blended panels. What I did do, and I didn't show the footage of this, is after I've done that initial set of blending where I kind of muddled all the colours together and got some nice smooth blends, I did grab just a little touch more of that faded white just to get some sort of brighter highlights on a couple of the areas. And all I did was just dab some of that faded white over the fully blended workup that was already there, and while everything was still wet, just mushed it in a bit more. And all it does is just mixes with the paint below it and brightens up that area, you know, the area where you've placed the white paint. So it was really simple to be able to adjust and, you know, fiddle about with on the fly. It was, again, infinitely correctable. If I had have made what I felt was a mistake, all I'd have had to do is grab some white spirit on a brush and just sweep the paint off. In fact, there were a couple of areas where I accidentally peeked onto the skeleton, the sort of silvery bits that are underneath. And that's exactly what I did. I just grabbed a brush with some white spirit on it and cleaned them off, and it was fine. It was done. It was great. So let's go back to some conventional acrylic painting now, because we're trying to kind of compare and contrast the two methods here and, you know, what we have to do. So I wanted some sponge chipping next. Did a couple of layers of sponge chipping here. First of all, I used some P3 Boiler Black, which is a new paint to me, something that Lazy Dragon Gaming, my lovely sponsor, sent me to try out, and really like it actually. It's nice. It's a nice dark silver, that's what it is. Then I got some Vallejo Dark Aluminium and did another layer of sponge chipping with that. Dark Aluminium being such a thin paint, you do have to be a bit careful when you're sponge chipping with it. You probably, instead of dabbing it just on like a normal piece of paper, you want to make sure you're dabbing it specifically on something absorbent like kitchen roll or toilet roll, just to pull some of that really thin liquid medium away from it and just leave, you know, an actual workable particle on the sponge. Now, funny enough, in my video a little while back, 5 essential recipes that I can't live without, I painted some hazard stripes. And those hazard stripes were actually painted on one of the components of this miniature, so I just quickly had to glue that into place now before I moved on to the next step. And that next step is, of course, painting the hazard stripes. Now, as I said, the way that I do these is in that video, 5 essential recipes I can't live without. If you want to see how I did this in detail, feel free to go and watch that video after this one. But just some nice hazard stripes, basically. Just dotted them in over the arms. I noticed on the box art that they did this kind of chevron pattern to the hazard stripes. I really liked that, so that was what I decided to go with. But I kind of paint my chips integrally as I'm going to make things a bit quicker, and then I've kind of just got to come back and sort of dither about with some smaller, finer chips and scratches afterwards. So this is what the stripes look like when they're finished. I really, really like this method for painting stripes. It's very simple, but this is how they look once they're all blocked in yellow. And then from there, I'm just going to take some Mournfang Brown to glaze them down, add a bit of character to them, add a bit of interest to them. And then once that's done, then we'll get some Ice Yellow from Vallejo, and we'll just start to put in some highlights. I do sort of make a point of trying to trace around some of the larger chipped areas and stuff, just to kind of add a bit of character to them. But for the most part, just kind of follow the volumes of the miniature and, you know, include the Ice Yellow in the highlight. You can even sort of do a bit of intermediary where you mix some Ice Yellow with some Avalon Sunset and kind of, you know, get an intermediate highlight before you go all the way up to that really bright pure Ice Yellow. Then there's also obviously some black areas in between them and a couple of black areas just on the miniature in general. I'm going to tackle these just by mixing some Heather Blue from Reaper Master Series paints into my Scale 75 Art Black. Just make some progressive mixes of this ever so slightly blue toned grey and just build up some black highlights with that. Very, very simple. Once that's all complete, this is what your black highlights are going to look like. Pretty tidy, not bad at all. For the eyes on this guy, I noticed again in the box art they'd done some kind of some sort of slightly glowing effect to them. I thought that the glowing effect that they used was maybe a little bit too loud. It didn't quite work for me, but I really liked the idea. So what I did was grab some Mephiston Red and then some Sunny Skin Tone and just made a couple of different mixes of these and sort of moved towards the outside of the eyes. And by moving towards the outside of the eyes, I sort of created this effect of like an intense red towards the centre, but then the kind of outside looks a little bit more like there's some glow going on. It's pretty interesting in the end. I quite liked how it turned out. Next, we get to play with some rust effects. Rust effects are one of my favourite things. Starting off with Mournfang Brown, you just thin the absolute bollocks off of it, take it right down thin, and paint streaks of rust and pools of rust, and same kind of way that you'd use like GW's Nihilak Oxide to oxidise copper. It's exactly what you're doing here with just thinned down Mournfang Brown. Works really, really well. Once that's all dry, you can then accent it with some Mars Orange from Scale 75. Now, Mars Orange has a really cool secret power for this effect in that it is extremely matte. That's kind of Scale 75's main range of paints. They're sort of known for having this really intensely matte medium to them. And obviously, the kind of powdery, brighter orange part of Rust does tend to have a really heavily matte look to it. So this paint is perfect just for accenting that rust. Then at the end, I just wanted to add a little freehand symbol on the shoulder. I wasn't even sure what I was going to paint here at first, but I sort of muddled around a bit and just kind of winged it and decided a number 2, mostly because this is a commission and the client, I knew that they'd already painted the first Ambot themselves, and this was the second Ambot of the pair. So I was just like, well, there's his number 1 and this is number 2, so let's put a number 2 on the shoulder pad. I did also just sort of rework a couple of those rust effects over the top of this afterwards as well, just to make it kind of look like it sat in with the rest of everything else, you know, painted a couple of scratches into it, that kind of thing. And so when all was said and done, my experience of mixing oil paints and acrylic paints was over. And I had some pretty major impressions from it. But before we get on to talking about that, let's just have a quick look at the finished miniature first of all. So here's that Lazy Susan footage. Let's take a look. Okay, so I said I had some pretty big impressions. One really major overriding big impression that I wish it had dawned on me sooner. Everyone always tells you oil paints are easier to work with than acrylics. Oil paints are more forgiving than acrylics. The only real negative you ever hear people talking about with oil paints is dry time, and I'm going to address that in just a second. But the first thing I want to say is people in general that talk about oil paints in this positive light, they're absolutely right. They're so easy to work with. Like, my mind was genuinely blown. I have not felt that much of a sense of revelation when it comes to the hobby in maybe like 10 years. It was huge. It was absolutely huge for me. I think maybe the last time that I discovered something that blew my mind to that level, it was probably like pigment powders. Which again are now a staple in my painting. They go on almost everything that I do. So yeah, I think the dismissal of oil paints might be something that's a little bit dangerous. I think we might be missing out here. These are equivalent in terms of quality, like the blending that I did with those oils. The equivalent is, it's equal to my best work. Those blends are as good as my best blends. But they took like 10 minutes. And to do my best blends with a combination of like wet blending and overglazing, it would probably take like 2-3 hours to do the entire armor on this Ambot. Now, I'm sorry, but if you can do a thing that is equal in quality and takes that much less time, and it's so easy, it's so nothing to just do it, to me that's a no-brainer. So I really, really hope that you will give oils a try after watching this. And if you do give oils a try after watching this, get at me in the comments and let me know. I want to know that other people feel this magical thing that I'm also feeling from using this new material. So the one thing I do want to quickly address, of course, is the drying time. You probably want to, at least if the miniature's definitely going to be handled a lot, you probably want to give your oils 24 hours to dry thoroughly. Abteilung 502 do make a fast drying thinner, which you can use to let down your oils, but whilst you're thinning them, it decreases their drying time. Obviously, that's a very helpful property. But I've not tried it, so I don't know how much quicker it makes them. I would probably advise giving your miniatures a solid 24 hours drying time after you've applied the oil layers. But, that said, if you don't want to do that, you can hairdryer them to get the surface layer dry, and then put a varnish layer over the top of them. Now, you want to varnish over oils anyway, because they come out really shiny, and the varnish also takes all the brush streaks out of them, and because the paint is so thick and so shiny, you will see brush strokes in it before you've varnished it. So you definitely do want to varnish them. But if you just kind of get them hairdryer, touch dry, and then varnish them, you probably are going to find that the miniature's not going to be as resistant to damage. You're probably going to find that the paint, because it hasn't had time to harden properly, it will probably chip off a bit easier. Now, if it's a display miniature that's never supposed to be handled, that doesn't matter. Just go with it. Like, if no one's supposed to be touching it and people are supposed to be being careful when they handle it, then you can paint it in a way where, you know, it might be a bit less fragile. But if it is a gaming piece that's going to be handled a lot, it's going to be moved around a lot, it probably makes sense to give them that 24-hour drying time. And I acknowledge that's definitely a problem for some people. But I think, you know, you can just kind of do your pre-prep, lay on your oils, put that project to one side until the next day, work on something else. And then the next day when those oils are dry, grab that project out, squirt it with a layer of varnish, continue working on it. So I don't think it's actually that much of a problem. Anyway, I don't want to waffle your heads off about oil paints. I'm just really impressed with them. The conclusion that I came to is that acrylics are actually kind of hard mode, and that's what we're all doing as a default. If you struggle with things like blending and you really feel like you want to be able to produce nicely blended miniatures, but you're having a really, really hard time, grab yourself some oil paints, give it a go. I'm going to get out of here now, but first of all, I just want to thank you for bearing with this video. I know it's a little bit tricky to sit and listen to somebody talk about something that can be very unfamiliar to a lot of us, and I do appreciate you taking the time to get to the end of it if you manage to do so. I also would like to say that if you like the video, I'd love you to hit the thumbs up button to let me know. You can, of course, also subscribe to the channel and enable those notifications, and that's going to tell you whenever I'm putting new videos out on YouTube. If you really like the content and you want to support its creation, I do have a Patreon that you can pledge to from as little as $1 a month, and that helps me keep making these videos, buying miniatures for the channel, buying paints and that kind of thing, so it's really, really helpful to me. Now folks, thank you so much for your time, thank you for watching the video. I'm going to see you in the next one and get out of here now, but bye bye for now.